This is the first of the panel discussions, and today we have a wonderful panel for our topic today, which is optimizing the security researcher and CSO relationship. Acting as our host today is Bill Boney with T-Mobile, and hopefully you guys will enjoy this session. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Bill Boney. I'm the CISO for T-Mobile. That's a carrier operator here in the domestic U.S. if there's any folks who are not from the mainland of the U.S. Of the members of our esteemed panel, I actually have the least qualifications to be standing here and pontificating with my colleagues in the community about how to work collectively. So what I'm going to do, though, is give each one of my counterparts an opportunity to step forward, introduce themselves, and then I'll resume this esteemed position of pointing to you all to answer questions. Okay?
Good morning, everybody. My name is David Litchfield. I am recently retired. I used to work for a company called NGS Software, and I'm more on the, well, not more on the research side of things. I am on the research side of things, and I frequently have conversations with gentlemen such as these on my right about such things as improving the way in which we collaborate together, because obviously, working towards the common goal of securing the internet economy. Actually, that was an at-stake phrase from a long time ago. They drilled that one in, didn't they? So, but seriously, it's all about improving that relationship to ensure that customers are protected. So that's passing on to John.
My name is John Stewart, Vice President, Chief Security Officer, Cisco Systems. I also hold the dubious honor of being at the company that last tried to goof up the security researcher / commercial relationship, and we've made all the newspapers at Blackhat for a number of years. We're looking forward to one of your companies doing something spectacular, so that way we can get off that hook. Feel free to do it this year. The combination of elements, the nature, frankly, that I've got a little bit of nerve-wracking experience, and this was talked about the executive forum yesterday, is we're watching, in fact, a significant change in which vulnerability data is being generated at an almost unbelievable pace, and the ability of both vendors to respond quickly enough, but then additionally for us to even know that it's being generated would move to a split economy. Essentially, we've got a research community that's dedicated towards exactly what David just described, who's been doing that for a number of years, and now there's a research community that we're having to look for that's in fact doing it for a completely different purpose. So I can't tell you that I've got all the answers in terms of how Cisco is going to respond to it, but I can tell you that we have had a long-standing practice of working with the research community, and hopefully it's continually improving as we expand our net towards bringing them and you and our company into the fold towards actually getting to the point that David made. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Bob Lentz. I was the former CISO for the Department of Defense for about 10 years and retired in October. I'm not diving and really retired. Wish I was, but I'm currently doing some consultancy work and enjoying myself, trying to play some golf. But this is a topic that is very, very near and dear to my heart, because I think most people in this community really do believe that we really aren't as focused in terms of our research priorities, and we also are not as focused on those leap ahead opportunities that we really need to get more involved in. And so, it's one of these things that if we don't pull together the research community and the CISOs and the other security leadership are not working very closely to galvanize those activities. Jeff's point this morning in the keynote about, hey, we've been doing this for 13 years. Well, we still have all these issues at the heart of trying to protect the internet. Well, what are we doing about those? And so I think this panel is on point in terms of trying to figure out the path ahead. And so it's, I think it's going to be fun today with this group, maybe having this discussion. I'm glad you all were able to find the conference room. So look forward to this discussion. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Alex Stamos. I'm one of the founders of ISEC Partners, and have the dubious distinction of having to be in charge of the research and evangelism part of our business while trying to balance that with running a white hat sellout firm. I think would be called a DEF CON. And so, have to deal with it on both sides, right? We have our researchers who are very interested in finding flaws and talking about them publicly and getting them fixed, and have to balance that with the fact that when you, at a certain point, when you're inside, when you're working with these companies, when you have 170-page master services agreements with them, it becomes a much more difficult thing to understand what the responsible and responsible disclosure means, and how you can properly work with somebody as a client at the same time you're treating them as somebody else on the other side of a disclosure process. So, looking forward to it.
Good morning. I'm Andrew Cushman. I'm a director at Microsoft in the Trustworthy Computing Group. Over the past couple of years, I've been responsible for the Microsoft Security Response Center, as well as for spearheading some culture change within Microsoft in terms of the outreach to the security community, or actually we now call it the security ecosystem, outreach to the security ecosystem. Helped found the Blue Hat Security Conference, that's the internal hacker conference at Microsoft. Although I am less involved on a day-to-day basis with the researcher relationships, I'm still quite active on the periphery. And I am also looking forward to this conversation.
Okay, so now you have the pedigree for all of the qualified folks sitting on this side of the panel. We're not going to go around and do any audience at this point in the discussion, but I thought, again, typically whenever I bring an issue forward to management, the first thing I get asked is, well, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And what's the business issue that's really at the core of this? So I'd like to get we have essentially at least two different elements here. The research community with their various agendas and drivers. We have the operational and development side of folks in the community. So I thought, again, what's the problem? What's the issue? Why are we having a panel at Blackhat on something that seems to be very straightforward to me?
Well, normally we see eye to eye. I think, for a long time, I've certainly been on the responsible disclosure side of things, and we're underrepresented here in terms of those who believe in full disclosure without reporting to the vendor. So I'm going to play devil's advocate for the time being. And in answering that question, we often see, too often we see issues where even well-known researchers find a security bug and they report it to the vendor does not meet their expectations, and that precipitates full disclosure immediately. And of course, we saw this the other day with Tavis Omendi's, Microsoft Help Center work, and he released this information, publicly, and a couple of weeks later, exploitation started taking place, and so on. And I think really that's why even today we still have to have a panel like this, because there are still, really, I would say infamous, famous, whatever kind of cases happening still today, when one would expect there wouldn't be. After 10 years or 12, 15 years, one would expect all these issues to be smoothed out. There's a couple more aspects, of course, and a lot of security researchers, well-known security researchers, Charlie Miller, Dino, Alexander Sotorov, all of these researchers have got together and said, no more free bugs. Basically, they see that, that they do all this great research, find these wonderful flaws, but they don't feel that there's any recognition coming back from the vendors monetarily, other than obviously this tiny wee, a thanks clause at the bottom of a security advisory and so on, and they feel that their work is being underappreciated. And in certain respects, I guess they could argue that that's true, and a lot of the marketplace is certainly from the vendor side, is leaning towards that way. For example, both Google and Mozilla now offer bug bounties, so in answer to that whole no more free bugs, that's sort of beginning to be replaced now by a sort of bug bounty thing. And I wanted to ask these guys, especially Microsoft, what are your thoughts on bug bounties these days, when you don't consider it as extortion?
I'm going to answer a different question. I'm going to answer Bob's question, which is, what problem are we solving? And I think that the problem that we're solving, the reason that there's disagreement here is how do we best secure computers? I think there's agreement at the high level on the goal that researchers and vendors and researchers and enterprises would like to improve the security of the computing infrastructure. There's disagreement on exactly what the best way to do that is. And there's also differing sets of motivation. Some vendors are more motivated than others to release security updates on a timely manner. Some people take them more seriously than others. So one, there's disagreement on what are the best tactics, and then there isn't the same agreement on what the relative priority of those actions are. And this isn't any different than a normal business problem where you've got different silos or different factions or different stovepipes that view a problem differently. And how do you actually then bridge across that to a common understanding? That's one dimension of the problem. The other that John talked about earlier is that the environment, the external environment, is changing very rapidly at this point. And so the motivation is not just about for the common good. The motivation now is often for how do I go and make a legitimate earning or legitimate living out of this? How do I translate this work into revenue? Microsoft is a firm believer. We understand that the issues, the vulnerabilities, do have value. Again, we don't see eye to eye with the security researchers on the best way, on the tactics for improving security. Computer security. We don't also see eye to eye on the tactics for how to best compensate security researchers. So a bug bounty is not necessarily the way that we think is the best way to go forward with that.
To the original question, I think the reason we have to have this panel is that the responsible disclosure consensus that Dave referred to is kind of falling apart. That maybe a couple of years ago, the white hat community, based upon the economic realities at the time, which was people did research to either build the reputation of their company so they could sell service or product, or to improve the product they sell, like the EI guys find all these bugs so that their scanner's better, that economic incentive on the white hat side has become much more diverse. That now you have people like Soderov and Dino and folks who go out either by themselves or with small little groups that are writing exploits and selling them. And the largest, consumer of these exploits is actually the US government. It is creating a huge, as far as from talking to these folks, a lot of them have one client, and that client is a 3-letter agency. And that's creating a different economic incentive that goes against responsible disclosure because now ODAs have value. And I think on the defense side that we also see ourselves on, we're finding that, responsible disclosure or any kind of disclosure doesn't make software better. The only, when I see software get better, and I think Windows is a good example of something that's gone better, it's because of concerted engineering effort to change how the software is written, how it's architected, and how it's tested internally. I can't think of a single product where I say, oh, well, they found, 55 CVEs, and those have all been patched, and therefore it's great now, right? Responsible disclosure is not about making software better. It's about managing munitions, right? And we got tied up in a certain famous series of break-ins that happened earlier this year that may or may not have been done by a certain People's Republic. And in that, it was ODA after ODA was used in a bunch of different products. And it kind of demonstrated to me that, responsible disclosure is just kind of it's a little bit silly because the people that are doing this professionally, if they have 3 or 4 researchers and a couple of exploit developers, when they're ready to attack a company or another government, they can just reach into their bucket of ODAs. And that bucket of ODAs has very little overlap with the bucket of public things that have been discussed and are being patched. So I think responsible disclosure almost has become it's a sideshow and a nice thing to talk about, and has very little to do with the actual security of most enterprises these days. That's just my opinion.
So Bob's going to defer all questions and just hand the mic over, since he's retired playing golf, is what he's telling me. So there are a couple of things that I think this boils down to. If I take the original question and then I take David's comments, I think there's some commonalities between vendors and researchers, and then there's some significant difference of opinion. So part of what it boils down to my mind, is asymmetry. Right now in the software community especially, it's actually easier to find problems than to fix them. And in fact, you could argue that the reason that they're easier to find is because the software development practices of the vendor are poor. Okay, so that's one argument to be made. The other argument to be made is that the forces of economic pressure cause vendors to release product before they're tested to the nth degree. And so therefore, the whole reason the vendor exists is because they get to market first. And that asymmetry means that they'll push the testing cycles down, potentially slower. And the third would be that the asymmetry is customers aren't buying security. They're actually buying something else, and if it happens to have security or something like it in it, that's great, but that's not in fact what the economic cycle is that's being purchased. So the research community and the vendors, I can tell you for sure, do not want a malicious and nasty exploitation to occur. So we've got that in common. The second thing, interestingly enough, that we're starting to get in common, where the vendors always had it and the research community had differing versions of it, is we both like to make money. And unfortunately, what that's now turning is to things like, to David's point, bounty, sort of bug bounties. I don't pay my employees to find bugs and give them bounties. So I guess I'm finding it a little puzzling as to why I'd start spending money for other people to find bugs in my product. On the other hand, I think there is a reward factor to be had, which is called appreciation. That's a much different element. So instead of bug bounties, it's thanks. Thanks, on the other hand, I'm very willing to go to the mat for. I very much appreciate the work that you've done, essentially voluntarily, and I am willing to go at small to large lengths. And interestingly enough, it's highly subjective as to what an individual that we talked to that found something would like. Some cases they actually do just want the thank you. Just a simple note of appreciation and disclosure that I found it. Copy that. Come to find out, the reason that is oftentimes useful was actually pointed out in the executive forum yesterday, which is finding a bug and building a reputation of finding bugs actually builds your business. So the acknowledgement that a vendor says, good job, greatly appreciate it, actually helps the research community profitably. Last point, David. But then the other element could be, I would actually like money, I would like a router, I would like free access to software so I can do more research, whatever it is that essentially is very low cost to a vendor, is the other spectrum of this. And I think that is thanks. That's very different. Because bountying essentially says, I really, really, really want you to find a ton of it. Thanks is just a simple acknowledgement that you didn't have to help me, and you did, and I think it's considered the politeness of the game. Last piece of this, responsible disclosure is a dead phrase. It probably was the dumbest phrase anyway, because it almost suggests that everybody else is being irresponsible on every other activity, and it's like a best practice. Everybody's version was responsible, and therefore everybody else's was irresponsible. I think what we've just got to get to is a point where you know how the vendor handles bugs, handles their disclosure, and then hold them accountable to it. Thanks.
Yeah. So the thanks definitely worked. I would have said about 5 or 6 years ago, especially when some of these researchers were beginning to make their name in the industry, but now they've been here. Actually, let's not even say 5, 6 years. Let's say 10 years. They've been getting thanks for the past 10 years. They've got well-established reputations in the industry. The thanks for these guys, I guess, is wearing a bit thin, and so they don't need to build reputation because they've got one of the best reputations out there. And at the end of the day, they feel obviously that you do incentivize your employees. You said you don't give them bonuses and stuff like that at work. Well, you do. You pay them a wage and so on. So there is that incentivization, and no doubt there's Christmas bonuses as well, I guess, or whatever, So I guess people like Mozilla and Google have turned around and said, if we formalize it, if we say, if you come to us with a really decent bug, we will incentivize you for that. We will give you, I think Mozilla's paying $3,000 at the moment, and Google have upped theirs to 31337 or something like that. It's got that whole lead speak in it and stuff. But rather than having, say, a researcher come up to them and say, look, I found this really cool bug, unless you play ball with me and pay me $3,000, I'm going to unleash it, and then you're going to have hell to pay. If they formalize it, then there's an expectation there, and those expectations are much better managed than someone necessarily coming towards the vendor and saying, got this really cool stuff, unless you play ball, I'm just going to unleash this, and then there's going to be all this client exploitation kind of, and it sort of gets it out of the gutter. And I don't like to say it, but it's almost like when you're at a you pull up at some traffic lights, and you've got a dirty windscreen, and someone comes along and cleans it for you. You didn't ask for that to be cleaned and everything like that, but the fact is you've now got a clean windscreen. You do pay the guy $1, you know what I mean? So he can go and feed whoever he needs to feed at home. So just throwing out a different twist in that regard.
Yeah, and I have to agree with David about the bug bounty. Thanks doesn't pay the mortgage, and our industry has grown up, and a lot of these researchers have kids, and they'd like them to have a backyard. And the other fact is, what's changed the last 5 years is now there's so many options for a researcher to sell their bugs that they're no longer, 5-6 years ago it was, okay, well maybe I'll find some sketchy guy on IRC and sell it to him, or I report it to John and he gives me thanks. And now the option is I can sell it to ZDI, I can sell it to this, I know my friend who knows a guy at DoD and I can sell it to DoD. The other thing I want to make clear is that bugs don't sell anymore, exploits sell, right? The proliferation and the success of anti-exploit technologies has made it so people have to go to great lengths to write, reliable exploits, people doing return-oriented programming, all the weird, crazy heap spraying stuff, Flash JIT, Java JIT, and because of that, finding bugs is still actually a pretty easy process. Anybody with a free fuzzer can go find bugs in most commercial software, but making that a reliable exploit is a skill set that is much more valuable now. And I think we're seeing now a differentiation in the value of an exploit versus the value of a bug. Since most of the people who are buying this don't have the exploit creation teams that are as good. And so I think we're going to continue to see the most interesting research isn't going to be research into finding bugs. It's going to be the research that like Mark Dowd has done and that Dino has done into creating new exploit technologies that get around the anti-exploit stuff like ASLR and NX and stuff and things like that.
Okay, so you guys are beating me up about the word thanks. I did actually indicate there is capitalization in that thanks just as much as words. So, don't lose track of that. And we got the question. So a comment about that. So the research community didn't used to be about for profit. And I think that the situation we're talking about now is it is turning itself into one that has a potential for profit.
I think it's been that way for a couple of years now, unfortunately.
Right. No, I'm not saying it's happened this morning, but it definitely has changed. So, it's entirely possible that might be part of the reason we're having the meeting or this panel discussion this year is because the client of the research is no longer uniquely the vendor, and that may in and of itself make a situation where the vendor could become the last person or last company to know about an exploit because in fact the research community can sell to a higher bidder. I guess that's the buyer beware scenario, which is we're going to get into a bidding war. I suspect, by the way, that I couldn't outbid the three-letter agencies we're talking about because I've seen the budgets.
Well, you haven't.
Oh yeah, right. Or I've seen the published budgets.
Yeah.
But I would suggest that simply that if that's where it's going, then I think the change of what the original goal that Bill brought up, which is we're trying to make the internet better, may in fact have already bifurcated to a different purpose, which is as a researcher, I'm trying to become profitable. I don't know that I consider that great news.
There's no charities represented on this stage up here, right? And I hate I know I'm just playing devil's advocate here, right? Since we got to represent our brothers, right? And but it has been for a long time the desire for security researchers to work for pennies and for thanks and to live in their mom's basement when they're dealing with Fortune 100 companies with $50 billion capitalizations, I think is incredibly hypocritical. And I don't begrudge. I mean, we don't sell exploits, we don't make exploits, we don't do any of that kind of stuff. That's not our business. But for the people that do, that is a valid business, and I don't like the idea of calling them evil because they want to make money for having an incredibly valuable skill that is very rare, that they're, at least Dino is doing it publicly. Like if Dino lived in an ex-Soviet country, you would never hear about him, but the guy would drive a Mercedes for sure, right?
Okay, so we have this also in common, which as soon as money gets involved on either side of the research community or the vendor community, bad things can happen. So that's what it comes down to. I absolutely agree that the research community shouldn't be quote unquote exploited specifically for the fact that the work is being done and we've got $50 billion capitalizations. That's why I said the word thanks is important, not because it's the word, but because the individual that actually does the work, because they're not a full-time employee, which I actually have a structured way by which I know they're going to be rewarded, actually can determine what they believe the best reward for them is. And it turns out, I think some of the communities decide that profit is actually part of the best reward.
Yeah, so I'm watching this tennis match going back and forth. It's kind of fun. I actually kind of fall in between both positions here because, I come from a culture in the Department of Defense where we give out medals, and we have people that are making, $25,000 a year out there getting killed every single day, and they fight just to get a medal on their chest. And so I kind of lean towards John's position to some degree that, thanks or recognition is worth a hell of a lot. And I think, what I find somewhat frustrating, and I like it when we go to an RSA conference, and it may sound a little corny, but when you recognize some of the leaders, unfortunately, we recognize the leaders that are sort of graybeards. And we don't recognize the real folks that are out there making the difference in the community. And, in the military, in most cases, the medals are going to those troops that are on the ground, putting their lives at risk, or in some cases, even researchers who are coming up with phenomenal new technologies, like coming up with a new Kelvar vest or a new, armor plating capability for a Humvee or whatever. And I think in this community, if we can get to that point where we have Jeff standing up there like this morning and spends the first 25 minutes, not putting, a keynoter up there, which is, I think, important to have that strategic discussion, but actually spending a good chunk of time recognizing people, recognizing the researchers, recognizing people that have made an operational difference. I think we can get closer to John's vision of maybe creating a community of practice that people will want to make this place a lot safer without having been paid $3,000 or $5,000. But on the other hand, I do agree you don't want to exploit them. And there's a lot of money to be had out there. A ton of money to be had out there, and we need to figure out a way to put that money in places where people can take advantage of it. Look at the Nobel Peace Prize, or all the Nobel prizes that are given out. What is it, $100,000?
$1 million.
Is it $1 million now? There's no reason why Microsoft and Cisco and all these big boys can't throw a bunch of money in the pot, including the government, and say we're going to give the Nobel Internet Security Prize of the year to this person, and by the way, we're going to have 15 runner-ups, and they're going to get $100,000 a pop or whatever. And I think if you start in that direction, you can get a little closer to John's vision. So that's my 2 cents.
Sort of the Vern Cerf Award for outstanding security leadership or something like that. Interesting. So,
just a quick thing was,
Yep.
I don't think, like I said before, buying exploits isn't making anybody more secure. It's like a needle exchange program, right? Needle exchange doesn't get people to stop doing drugs. It keeps them from getting AIDS, right? And I think that's what buying exploits on the market is that you're not making your software better. You're just getting those infected needles off the street.
okay, we did have an audience question. Sorry, you have to stand up and yell because we.
Yeah.
I interpreted it was collaboration between CSO, which is in my language is chief security officers and consumers of products and the research work more collaboratively with the research community to try and bring the focus to that domain. Interesting as the debate is about the reward that researchers should absolutely get for their effort.
Okay, so to summarize, the translated version for the American audience might be, how does the security practitioner leadership role work effectively with the research community to manage risk to an enterprise or an operating entity, as opposed to the macro level discussion about researching vulnerabilities and sharing them?
That's what happening. The two communities need to work together, and I presume that's the aim of the panel session. How do we collaborate much more effectively?
Okay, so again, I'll start off as a CISO of 30 plus years experience. You know, I've had limited interaction with the research community. It hasn't necessarily been real fun. It's usually been, you know, from a few years back, it's been, you know, why the heck can't you guys at company X that I used to work for, who shall remain nameless, patch this thing, this vulnerability that's everywhere within your infrastructure and give me credit for it? And, you know, trying to have a dialogue was very challenging because the person was on the other side of the world. They were very maniacally focused on getting us to give them attribution and you know, fixing it. And so it went into our typical engineering reform practice. That's going to take a long time to work through all of the practices, because fixing the identified problem the way that the subject had proposed would have created additional vulnerabilities and downstream issues they were not aware of. So that was my own experience. So it wasn't fun, but at the end of the day, it was, we hear you, we're taking it seriously, we'll work it. But you know, that's sort of the ad hoc way that I think a lot of us end up doing it. What's the best practice way for interacting with the researchers? I guess I'll start with our colleagues at Microsoft, because you've developed a good protocol for that.
I would start with the claim that I said this earlier, that this isn't any different than, this is similar to other problems in other industries where you've got stovepipes of interest or silos of people with a unique perspective on a problem. I think that part of the problem between the established enterprises or vendors and security researchers is a different perspective, and that there's a lot of emotion that gets involved in it, and the tactics are such that they're confrontational. They can be. And so each side loses sight of the fact that, in fact, they have a common goal, which is improved computer security. So my advice would be, make sure that, you know, if somebody comes to you, it's because they want the right thing to happen. Now, my experience has been that we disagree about tactics on how to get the right thing to happen. But if you come back to, look, we both want the same thing. I remember conversations with H.D. Moore. I like H.D. Moore. He has a very different perspective on how to go about getting a more secure infrastructure than I do. I like Dave Vitale too. We continue to have dialogue. So then I think start with the first one that says there is commonality here, and then get creative about how can you actually extract value from that. How can you get past the blockage of no, you must do it this way, or I can't do it that way. I think there's also an element that says make sure that you introduce a human element. To make one of the things for Microsoft was to make sure that people knew that we weren't just an evil Borg somewhere in Redmond. Associate a face with a name. Associate, you know, help them understand some of the motivations behind that. That's a good first start. And then dialogue is the most important thing, because the initial request or the initial if you're in a business negotiation for anything, you're going to go buy something, or you want a new job, or you know, whatever it is, you start with a initial request, and then you get to a place through discussion where people go, oh, okay, I can actually I see how that's good for everybody. Too often the discussion stops.
The question that came out of the audience is, how does the consumer of technology essentially work better with the research community or even interact with it? Well, part of it's here. I mean, you're actually interacting in many capacities. I think the second part is that, and I liked one of the points you just made, Andy. So reasonable people can disagree. So that's a good thing to note. The second thing is that The idea that you actually, as a vendor or as a consumer or as a researcher, actually put the human element to it is exceedingly important to my mind. I think the difference between vendors, quite honestly, in same or different fields is how you treat people that come to you. The other part that Annie may have mentioned of, and I'd like to second it, is almost every single person that I've ever interacted with typically approach Cisco with the idea that they're trying to help something. They're not, in fact, trying to hurt.
Yeah, because the guys that are trying to hurt, you never hear from them.
They don't typically call you. They don't typically call you. And if they do, it's oftentimes to just let you know that you might want to check the newspaper. So that's how I think the continuance of this community. But frankly, as a consumer of technology, I think one of the things that all of us can frankly do, and that's part of the reason I sponsor this conference, is support conferences like this by coming. And I'm not advertising because Jeff's paying me to do such. But I think that's part of the reason this particular, as well as DEF CON and even some of the other ones recently, are so important, is because frankly it brings the reason people together so they can have a debate like we're having today. Vice just ignore, get pissed, and move on.
So as a consumer, one of the things we need in the security world is your help to ground us to be doing research that actually impacts you. When you go to a major enterprise, 90% of the technology stacks that most people use, you will never see a talk about them here at Blackhat, right? The reason there's so many Windows bugs found is because any 13-year-old in Finland can download Windows 7 as a torrent and then run it on his own machine or on a virtual machine, right? You don't see research about Siebel because you have to have a team of 4 guys install it on 5 machines and then a full-time admin to pray to it all the time to make it work, right? So like the critical enterprise technology stacks are often not looked at. The Cisco devices that get looked at are the cheap things that you can buy secondhand. You don't see, GSR 10Ks or whatever being targets of research because we don't have access to that equipment. And so we try very hard to work with our clients and with friends of ours to figure out that stuff. So for example, we're doing what's going to be open research on virtual desktop technologies, and we're looking at them as major FIs are deploying them. And so we get the benefit of saying this technology does or does not work. It turns out it does not work. In this deployment scenario, which turns out to be a very, very common deployment scenario in the top FIs. And we get to talk about how we looked at a real network and how these are real issues and write a nice big white paper. They get early access to our results that guides them, and they don't have to pay us for the work because we're publicly going to publish it, probably at CanSec. Oh, I shouldn't say that word. And so, that's the kind of thing that I think if you're here and you see a researcher who's doing work that's related to something you care about, go contact them and say, I've got this technology stack, I'm worried about it, why don't we work together? I'll provide you my install of a $300,000 of licensed software. You get to look at it. Like that's how we did our Encase Enterprise research, because a lot of our clients were really scared about Encase Enterprise, and the cheapest copy you can get is $250K. And so we had to test it as they were really using it, and that was beneficial for both us and them, and they stayed anonymous while they tried to sue us, which was fun, but anyway.
Another comment I would add to is the security research community comes at the problem from a unique perspective. They have a skill set that you don't often find in enterprises. So make sure that you understand what that skill set is, make sure that you understand what those motivations are, and then just like think of it as any other business problem where you've got a tough business problem, what resources are available to help me solve this problem? And don't get stuck on, oh, but they don't like to come in at 8:30 in the morning, and they don't really do well with authority. You need to make sure there's open space. Look past that and say, how do I take this set of skills and apply that to my business problem? Because that's essentially what it is. And then figure out, is there a happy medium where you can be happy and they can be happy? A lot of these guys don't want a 9-to-5 job anyways. I've seen a lot of times where it's the perception that blocks any productive dialogue from happening. I introduced some CSOs to some hackers in Argentina, and one of the comments was, oh, I'm scared. It's like, what? These are just regular people, you sit down, you have a drink with them, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, there's something that you share in common, whether that's a love of football or soccer or something else that takes you to a place where all of a sudden you can have meaningful interactions.
Make one other comment. To the extent that you have means and protocols, mechanisms to facilitate that intercommunication, that will help too. Because one of the comments that I received in the past life was, gosh, we didn't know who to send this to when we found it. And you know, it's interesting because on the inside you say, well, the security guys, you know, send it to us. But if you're sitting outside and you've discovered a vulnerability in an existing protocol or a product or you know, something that needs to be shared, how's it going to get to you as the CSO or as the accountable person that's going to have the accountability? Participation in things like FIRST and product certs can also help formalize that practice even more so. We have another question, sir?
Yeah, Joe Klein. I've been doing research basically on this particular problem and actually running for game theory. And what we're finding is researcher loses consumer and or corporation loses big. The reason for that is the first thing most corporations do is they bring out the legal dogs and chase them down. Also because a lot of corporations have their own motivations. As an example, Microsoft. For a long time, I've produced vulnerabilities and actually demonstrated them. Unfortunately, most corporations, like Microsoft or whatever, have actually internal people who also have their own motivations. A lot of times the motivation is to actually hide vulnerabilities from the security organization. So they'll actually say, no, don't talk to you as an example. Give me the vulnerability so I can solve this particular problem. So you have an internal issue. The other thing is we have maturity of specific organizations. Many organizations will, again, send out legal dogs. By the way, the average cost of a researcher so far, they're finding when the legal dogs are called out, and anywhere from $90,000 to $150,000 for a researcher to deal with this particular issue. The second issue is we have corporate people here. You use the word hacker again as a pejorative. Okay? In your media presentations, you guys do this on a pretty regular basis. Instead of saying security researcher. So you're also part of the problem there in the use of language and presentation of, you know, we have a criminal. Criminal is a criminal. Whatever, whether they use a crowbar or vulnerability. They're a criminal. Unfortunately, that's not what we're actually seeing in this particular space. And yeah, I've been doing this for a pretty long time.
So there's varying points that you just made there. I think there's a core one, which is how, and this, I've been doing this stuff for 20 years. We still can't decide exactly what words we like for who. You know, is a hacker, and then there was the word cracker, and everybody thought that was stupid, so then we shot that one. Then it was, you know, then there was the well, look, I got one right there too. I got the word hacker on there.
The new word is Bustakati, by the way.
Bustakati?
Yeah, as in like the Illuminati.
You gotta
Sorry, Bustakati is the new word.
Bustakati.
Bustakati, those who can bust things.
So apparently there's going to be a brown book out soon that's going to have Bustakati in it, and it's going to have some deep hidden meaning over how source code's written. I didn't know that one at all. At any rate, we take nomenclature for granted, and we don't typically use similar terms for similar people. For example, the security research community, to my mind, is no longer one group of people. The vendor community, to me, has never been one group of people. We've all got somewhat different tiering and the like. The second thing you brought up, though, was motivations inside of vendors. At least from my perspective inside of Cisco, and this is not a totalitarian experience because I don't know everything that happens within the company at every given second, much as I would love to, and then again, maybe not, is that what typically happens inside of a vendor, first of all, I don't believe that we call our legal dogs out first ever. I think we've called that out exactly last once, maybe twice, but once. That actually, to thank God, the reasonable people that work in the organization, some of which are in this room, don't want that. They actually want to fix problems. They want to solve problems. They want to help customers. And so the good news, at least from my perspective, is you can hold me personally and my company to that statement. That's not what we try. In fact, we consider it a last resort completely. The second thing is that the motivations inside of companies are not trying to hide security bugs. What they are trying to typically do is ship product faster. That can manifest itself into, I don't want to know about that bug. I don't have time to know about that bug. I've got to ship tomorrow, and you're about to screw up my schedule. But the motivation's different. It's not, I'm trying to hide a security bug. It's, I'm trying to ship a product. It may unfortunately turn into both at the same time. The last part of this, to your point about game theory, is I actually think the research community and the vendor lose both when a security bug is found. Because, and I say that for the following reasons, the goodness of finding it is typically exploited before the fixes are coming out. So we're losing one of the goals of first principles, which was, I'm just trying to make the internet better. The second is that no matter which way we look at it, the customer of the research and combined vendor community lose, because they're the ones that get exploited. And that leads me to the final point, which was you brought up. There's difference between research and use of research, and that's why research and applied research are different. Research to me is good in this world. Applied research done for bad is criminal.
I think the complicated thing about motivations is that huge companies are not monoliths. And one of the things we run into is you can greatly overestimate the importance of a security team or even a CSO inside the organization. Because at most organizations I've seen, the CSO is less important than like a VP of a product line. Because that VP has a P and an L, and the CSO only has an L, right? And so if you start dealing with good intentions with the security team, you can go down this 6-month path where in the last week, when the New York Times story is written and the chief marketing officer gets it and takes it over to the VP of that product, who is getting bonused based upon hitting ship dates and shipping number of units and certain press metrics, all of a sudden they call out the legal dogs without the good-natured people in the security team who know that that's a bad idea. They're the ones who call it the legal dogs, and that's happened to us a couple of times. And fortunately, it's never gotten to the point of where it's out of control. But I think that's the real problem with big companies. Is I think for Microsoft or Cisco, they're at the point where you have high enough people that understand you let your security team deal with it. But at a lot of companies, there's a really good, well-meaning security team that when it actually hits the fan, they have no control over how the organization responds. And instantly, executives at a certain level always start with their lawyers, because their lawyers are part of any discussion, and a lawyer sees they have a hammer called a lawsuit or a temporary restraining order, and everything's a nail. And and if you've got a partner from Bingham, and you're not going to bang on Bingham too much, but if you got a partner from Bingham sitting in your room with your CEO in this discussion, the Bingham partner is going to say these are our options, and every single option is going to include legal action. There's not going to be an option of let's just live with it.
So the good news is there's a case study of how well that goes. So we've at least set a precedent by which to learn from.
No. All right, there's another question, sir.
So I'll skip a long-winded explanation of why I'm asking the question. I'll get it immediately. Government frequently tries to communicate, especially U.S. government, sorry for foreign folks. Government tries to communicate through the RFI/RFP process. How effective is that in communicating research to you? And what should be done instead?
So the question is, how effective is the procurement? Okay.
So I misunderstood your question initially. So essentially, is the RFI/RFP process actually indicating early indicators to vendors, hey, this is what we need next, now, new, whatever? To my mind, no. I think the better way, and again, somewhat U.S.-centric, though this is not completely a U.S.-centric problem. Bluntly, there is no unified security research agenda for the United States of America. There is highly duplicative research agendas by various organizations that the United States government sponsors. There is highly confusing, contradictory research agendas, of which, by the way, we're being asked as vendors sometimes to participate in. And in fact, ironically, then point out the fact that one group's not talking to the other clearly because they're asking for the exactly opposite things or the exactly duplicate things. If that were to actually change, I think you would find a significantly better place, to me. That would be how the early indicators of what do we need, what do we want, would end up coming to a vendor a little more clearly, at least to my mind. you might have a different opinion.
Well, I think the acquisition RFI RFP process is I think just a small fraction, and not really the right way to go to do this. I do believe that the open indicators of what some of the standards need to be to get open dialogue and discussion is the right way to go. And I think there's been great progress at times made. When we establish, I remember in the 1990s, let's put out a high performance, high speed security standard and let everybody go after it. Or, we can all think in this room about all these different standards and that could in fact generate a lot of research dialogue. I think that's the right way to really get energy going. I also recall an example where under the CNCI, the Cyber Initiative, there's a lot of focus on leap ahead technologies. And we put together a large group. I don't know if it was well recognized around, so everybody had a chance to participate. It probably was a little bit too controlling in its process. But what I found very interesting about that leap ahead process was it went out and said, we want all these great papers and research ideas on how to move the ball forward. At the end of the day, the consensus of the group, after looking at this problem for a good year, there was no research leap ahead ideas at all out there. Okay? But the good news is there was an attempt to try to generate that discussion and not using RFPs and RFI processes to get dialogue going. So I think there's a happy medium there, but we get to do a much better job at trying to generate those kind of things.
We've got about 2 minutes remaining, so if there's no additional quick question, there's one question way in the back there. Ma'am? So how would the conversation alter if there? Reasonably safe standards of software.
I think that'd be the end of the software industry. Newsflash: software engineering is not really engineering, right?
Right.
I call myself an engineer, but I don't build it like If bridges were built like software, we'd all be dead in this room, right? So, I think honestly, a rule like that, while some people push for it, I think that's just going to be a class action lawyer, Full Employment Act of 2012, right? It's not going to really have anything to do with, because there's no way to define that. And realistically, software is way more, Windows is way more complex than the Space Shuttle, and you can't fix it.
A quick comment from our Microsoft colleague, then we'll be.
So back to the game theory, I think about it differently. I think about this as the theory of constraints. And that is that, we've got a problem, we end up with a dilemma, and the reason we haven't solved that yet is we haven't applied enough creativity to that problem yet. There is a solution, you just need to come back to it. So I think that if you apply theory of constraints, that the suggestion about some legislation that says reasonable, I think that that may be a suggestion that moves it forward a little bit, but that clearly isn't going to be a solution to the dilemma that we're talking about here.
With that, we're going to bring this session to an end. I want to thank the panelists for an outstanding job of presenting their information.